hours and 15 minutes. I now give the floor to Mr. Thomas Andrews to present his report. Sir, you have the floor.
Distinguished members of the United Nations Human Rights Council. 1 month ago, I addressed this body in a special session on the crisis in Myanmar. At that time, 10 days after the illegal military coup d'etat had begun, I reported that the junta had murdered 1 individual and arbitrarily detained over 200. In the written report that I filed last week, I documented a total of 23 murders. As of this moment, credible reports indicate that Myanmar security forces have murdered at least 70 people. Madam President, those murdered were fathers, sons, mothers, daughters, husbands, and wives. They were educators, they were engineers, they were students, they were many ages, but more than half of those murdered were members of Generation Z, or young people under the age of 25. It is a horrible truth that as soon as I issue a report, the number of murders and arbitrary detentions in Myanmar become outdated. The junta is detaining dozens, sometimes hundreds, every day. As of last night, the total number of arbitrary arrests and detentions since the 1st of February had risen beyond 2,000. And the violence against protesters, including violence against people sitting peacefully in their homes, is steadily increasing. In addition to the murders and detentions, there is extensive video evidence of security forces viciously beating protesters, medics, and bystanders. There is video of soldiers and police systematically moving through neighborhoods, destroying property, looting shops, arbitrarily arresting protesters and passersby, and firing indiscriminately into people's homes. There is shocking video of the aftermath of attacks, including fatal gunshot wounds to the heads of protesters, and video of soldiers dragging or carrying away the dead bodies of their victims. As I documented in my report, the junta has systematically destroyed legal protections from freedom of expression, assembly, and association to the right to privacy. It has given itself authority to invade people's homes without warning, removed habeas corpus, so the right to appear before a judge to determine whether an arrest is lawful, criminalized any criticism of the junta, even making it illegal to call the junta a junta. It enabled sweeping surveillance authorities, decimated the free press, banned most trade unions, instituted nightly countrywide internet outages, and banned gatherings of more than 5 people. Madam President, the country of Myanmar is being controlled by a murderous, illegal regime. Its current leadership perpetuated the atrocity crimes that are the focus of the charge of genocide before the International Criminal Court of Justice. As I documented in the annex to my report, the crimes against the Rohingya people continue. Since the coup, the Myanmar military has attacked and forcibly displaced several thousand members of ethnic nationalities from their homes. It should come as little surprise that there is growing evidence that this same Myanmar military, led by the same senior leadership, is now engaging in crimes against humanity, including the acts of murder, enforced disappearance, persecution, torture, and imprisonment in violation of fundamental rules of international law. Of course, a full investigation and a trial before a court of law are required to formally find crimes against humanity. And I know that the independent investigative mechanism for Myanmar is collecting evidence on this point right now. But I implore all of you to look at the facts available in light of international legal precedent finding crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity require 1 or more prohibited acts, and I quote, committed as a part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population with knowledge of the attack, unquote. These murders, imprisonments, enforced disappearances, and other acts against the people of Myanmar clearly appear to be part of a coordinated campaign rather than a series of isolated events. They're directed against the civilian population rather than combatants. They are widespread in their frequency. For example, over 2,000 people arbitrarily detained and with people murdered in at least 28 townships throughout the country. They are well organized with coordinated efforts by police and military pointing to higher level command and control. In other words, these attacks on the people are systematic, rather than accidental. And finally, they are being carried out with the knowledge of senior leadership. Indeed, Senior General Minh Laing, the leader of the junta, has repeatedly commented on the attacks and the junta issued a warning on state media of the loss of life if protests continue. Protests indeed continued, and more peaceful protesters lost their lives. Madam President, if we accept that there is a strong likelihood that the Myanmar junta is engaged in atrocity crimes against its own people right now, as we sit here, what do we do about it? Knowing as we do the price of international inaction, what action must be taken immediately? Yesterday, the UN Security Council released a statement expressing their deep concern about developments in Myanmar. They condemned the violence against peaceful protesters and expressed continued support for a democratic transition. These words are welcome, but they are wholly insufficient. Madam President, the people of Myanmar are desperate. They are upholding and defending the highest principles of this body and the United Nations, including their commitment to nonviolence. But these principles and their very lives are under vicious attack. The people of Myanmar need not only words of support, but supportive action. They need the help of the international community, and they need it now. I realize that not every nation is prepared to act, but the reluctance of a few nations to act should not prohibit or limit any coordinated action at all. The coordinated actions of nations working together will be the most effective actions. Various governments have imposed various sanctions against the military junta in Myanmar. This is welcome, but sanctions will only be effective if they are unified and coordinated. Today, I am therefore urging member states to commit to taking strong, decisive, and coordinated action as a coalition of nations, an emergency coalition for the people of Myanmar. Upon forming, I urge this coalition of member states to consider taking 5 immediate steps. First, stop the flow of revenue into the illegal junta's coffers. This can happen now. Multilateral sanctions should be imposed on both senior junta leaders and their major sources of revenue, including military-owned and controlled enterprises and Myanmar oil and gas enterprise. 1.5 years ago, the independent international fact-finding mission on Myanmar concluded that no business, and I quote, should enter into an economic or financial relationship with the security forces of Myanmar, in particular the military, or any enterprise owned or controlled by them or their individual members until and unless they are restructured and transformed. Since the coup, some businesses have stepped forward and cut ties with the junta, and they are highlighted in my written report. However, many continue to engage in business with military-owned enterprises. If companies won't willingly disengage, Madam President, member states should step up. Myanmar's natural gas projects will generate an estimated $1 billion in revenue this year. Without sanctions, the illegal military junta of Myanmar will be able to use these funds to support their criminal enterprise and their attacks on innocent people. More than 400 civil society organizations in Myanmar share my concern, as reflected in a joint statement calling on the international community to ensure that oil and gas revenues are used only for humanitarian purposes or held until the legal control of the resources of the government of Myanmar can be established. The emergency coalition of the people of Myanmar should enact sanctions that include Myanmar oil and gas enterprise to ensure that oil and gas revenues do not flow to the junta. Coalition member states should outlaw the export of arms to the Myanmar military. 41 countries have already imposed some forms of arms embargo against the Myanmar military. What is needed now is a coordinated embargo that will end the sale of weapons and the transfer of dual-use technology to Myanmar. This can save lives. Member states that have universal jurisdiction laws should initiate investigations of these ongoing crimes and make preparations to file charges against Myanmar's senior security officials. Stop the flow of humanitarian and development aid through the junta. Work directly with local civil society aid organizations whenever possible. And finally, I urge member states to deny recognition of the military junta as the legitimate government representing the people of Myanmar, precisely because they are not. These are some of the actions that nations together can take to fulfill our collective responsibility. Others can be considered. But what is critically important is that member states coordinate their actions and work together in a coalition committed to standing with and for people under attack. Despite the widespread and systematic atrocities that the Myanmar military and police forces are committing daily, the people of Myanmar continue to rise up from every corner of the nation as a diversified yet powerfully unified whole. They are doing so to demand democracy, human rights, an immediate end to the violence, and an end to an illegitimate junta. The Nonviolent Civil Disobedience Movement, or CDM, is effective and growing, drawing its organic power from the unflinching commitment of the Myanmar people. Myanmar has never appeared to be more unified, but they need our help, and they need it now. Madam President, I sincerely hope that the international community will rise to the occasion of this historic moment by following the lead and the inspiration of the people of Myanmar, by coming to their aid as a coordinated and committed whole. They deserve no less. Thank you.
Thank you. According to our practice, we shall start by hearing the delegation of the country concerned by the report. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Myanmar. You have 5 minutes, please. You now have the floor.
Madam President, Myanmar takes note of the presentation made by Special Rapporteur. At the outset, I would like to reiterate Myanmar's position on country-specific mandate of Special Rapporteur. Myanmar has consistently opposed country-specific mandate, which ran contrary to the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, non-selectivity, and non-politicization in addressing the human rights issue of the country concerned. However, the successive government of Myanmar have cooperated with country-specific Special Rapporteur and accepted almost all of their proposed country visit. Despite this cooperation, Special Rapporteur Yang Li failed to comply with the Code of Conduct. Therefore, in 2017, previous government decided not to cooperate with her as it would not be productive for the people and the country. Madam President, allow me to briefly touch upon the recent development in Myanmar. After observation of voter list irregularities that could lead to the voter fraud in the general election held on 8 August last year, Tamra announced its finding and requested the previous Union Election Commission to resolve the irregularities. The finding revealed that out of 38 million voter lists issued by the UEC, about 10.48 million voter lists, which is about 1/4 or 25%, would lead to the case of vote rigging. The Tamara pointed out that the potential fraud included multiple appearances by an individual that could lead to person voting more than once and the inclusion of underage person and non-national content card holders. Tamara made a complaint to the UEC several times to address the issue of voter list irregularities, and the request was rejected by the UEC. In accord with the constitutional provision, the parliamentary representative of Lutto and some political parties asked the Speaker of Pironzo Lutto Union Parliament to resolve this issue through convening a special session of Parliament. Tamara also called for the postponement of new Lutto session until the proper solution to be settled by the UEC on voter list irregularities. Tamara requested the President to hold a National Security and Defense Council to resolve the issue properly. However, all these attempts were ignored and UEC failed to address the issue in line with existing law. In light of the failure of the UEC, Parliament and the government to address the issue and the attempt made by the Parliament to convene a new session of Parliament, before resolving the issue, the acting President declared a state of emergency for 1 year on 1st February, in accordance with Section 417 of the State Constitution, and transferred the legislative, executive, and judicial power to the Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Services in accordance with Section 418A of the State Constitution. Madam President, the composition of the State Administration Council is different from the type of military administration. The composition of SAC, central body to the local administration, included representation of both civilian people and national races. After assumption of the responsibility of state, SAC did not abolish the state constitution 2008, and it has made its commitment to consolidate the genuine, disciplined, multi-party democratic system that suit the prevailing situation of the country. It also expressed its commitment to comply with international obligations and to follow the country's foreign policy and existing laws. The SAC also retained Myanmar National Human Rights Commission to continue its duties and responsibilities. The SAC announced 5 prioritized future programs, which included reconstitution of new UEC to carry out verification of voter lists, enhancing the measures to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, taking measures to address the economy stagnated by the COVID-19, restoring lasting peace in the entire nation through effective implementation of nationwide ceasefire agreement, and handing over the state responsibilities to a winning party via holding of free and fair multi-party democratic general elections. Madam President, in the recent days, authorities concerned have been paying attention to maintaining law and order in the country. Authorities have been exercising utmost restraint to deal with the violent protests. Since 8 February, the authorities imposed Section 144 of the Criminal Procedure, which prohibits gathering of 5 or more people in public places in 146 townships, where violent protests and riots have created disturbances to the public order and the rule of law.
Thank you. I understand that is the end of the video statement. I now invite interested delegations to ask questions to the Special Rapporteur and to make comments on his report. I now give the floor to the United Kingdom, who is represented by Mr. Nigel Adams. He is the Minister for Asia at the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. He will give a video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. The violent crackdown on peaceful protesters in Myanmar is completely unacceptable. Perpetrators of the coup must be held accountable for the appalling human rights violations committed. The United Kingdom welcomes the Special Rapporteur's report. We are deeply concerned by the human rights situation, the people of Myanmar's wishes, and the result of the November 2020 general election must be respected. Democracy must be restored. We call for the immediate and unconditional release of all persons arbitrarily detained in Myanmar and the lifting of the state of emergency. Arbitrary detentions set an extremely dangerous precedent for enforced disappearances and ever-increasing draconian measures. At the time of speaking, since the 1st of February, 1,857 protesters have been arrested, charged or detained on political grounds. Over 60 people have now been killed. In line with this Council's resolution, we urge the international community to express in the strongest terms our collective concern. The coup will have consequences beyond the political sphere, exacerbating conflict, poverty and the exclusion of minority groups, including the Rohingya. Thank you, Madam President. Special Rapporteur, in your view, what steps should the Human Rights Council take to ensure the release of all those arbitrarily detained?
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of the European Union, His Excellency Mr. Eamon Gilmore. He is the EU Special Representative for Human Rights. Sir, you have the floor by video statement.
Madam President, the EU would like to thank the Special Rapporteur. We condemn in the strongest terms the military coup, and we stand with the brave people of Myanmar defending democracy. The military has increased brutal repression of peaceful protests and must be held to account. The military must immediately stop the use of force against civilians and allow the population to express their rights. The EU calls on the military to end the state of emergency and for the release of the President, the State Councillor and all those arbitrarily detained. We reiterate our support to the independent investigative mechanism and take note of the assessment that acts committed since the 1st of February may amount to serious human rights violations and crimes against humanity. We will not forget the grave violations of international law and discrimination against minorities, including the Rohingya. The EU calls on Myanmar to implement the provisional measures following the ICJ order and takes note of the ICC authorization to investigate within its jurisdiction. In response to the coup, the EU stands ready to adopt restrictive measures targeting those directly responsible while avoiding measures which could adversely affect the people. Mr. Special Rapporteur, would you please elaborate on the patterns of restrictions on the freedom of expression and press?
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lithuania on behalf of a group of countries by video statement.
Thank you, President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Nordic Baltic countries, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Latvia, Norway, Sweden, and my own country, Lithuania. We thank the Special Rapporteur, Mr. Tom Andrius, for his important work and firmly support his mandate. We strongly condemn the coup and are gravely concerned about the killings of peaceful protesters in Myanmar. We condemn the military's use of deadly violence, beatings, mass arbitrary detention, intimidation and systematic repression of civil and political rights. This must be stopped immediately and perpetrators brought to justice. All arrested political leaders and civic activists must be released and any internet and media restrictions and shutdowns lifted. As the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbates the crisis, we urge Myanmar to fully cooperate with all relevant UN mechanisms and mandates and to immediately grant them full and safe humanitarian access to the entire country, in particular to areas with internally displaced persons. Our countries stand in solidarity with the people of Myanmar and support a peaceful return to respect for human rights, democratic governance, and rule of law. Mr. Special Rapporteur, how could the Council best support your mandate in these challenging times? Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on the distinguished representative of Pakistan on behalf of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. This statement will be given by Zoom.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The OIC thanks the Special Rapporteur for his report. The OIC shares SR's concerns of the grave human rights situation for Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. We condemn the targeted and indiscriminate attacks that have resulted in the deaths of 33 Rohingya Muslims, including women and children, in the year following the ICJ's order. The OIC expresses serious concern over the lack of implementation of provisional measures by the ICJ. COVID-19 has further exacerbated the public health and human rights situation for Rohingya. The OIC regrets the exclusion of Rohingya from the democratic process, including during the last general elections. The OIC therefore urges Myanmar to strictly follow the ICJ's interim order, cooperate with all independent national, regional and international criminal justice and judicial mechanisms, as well as with the UN and relevant human rights mechanisms. Implement all recommendations of the Advisory Commission on Rakhine's slate, including restoring citizenship of Rohingya without any delay. Build trust among the Rohingyas temporarily sheltered in Bangladesh through confidence-building measures, including direct communication between the Rohingya and the Myanmar authorities. Immediately commence repatriation of the forcibly displaced Rohingya through engaging with Bangladesh with the forthright political will. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany by video statement.
Madam President, Germany aligns itself with the EU statement. We welcome the work of the Special Rapporteur. His access to Myanmar must be ensured. Germany reaffirms its strongest condemnation of the military coup and reiterates its call to release all those detained. We also firmly condemn the increasingly violent crackdown on peaceful demonstrators and the intimidation and oppression of those opposing the coup. This must stop immediately. We welcome ASEAN's recent call for a peaceful solution through constructive dialogue and practical reconciliation. Human rights must be protected, including freedom of expression and assembly, access to information, and the right to privacy, both online and offline. The protection of human rights requires the reinstallation of the democratically elected civilian government in accordance with the will of the Myanmar people. We remain deeply concerned by the human rights situation of the Rohingya. Ongoing violations must stop. The Human Rights Council must strive for accountability. We welcome the work of the Independent Mechanism on Myanmar and other efforts in this regard. Mr. Special Rapporteur, what is the current situation for human rights activists and journalists? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jordan by Zoom. Jordan seems to be absent, so we'll proceed with Libya by video statement, please.
Thank you. We'd like to thank the Special Rapporteur for the report. We support Resolution 29.1 adopted during the special session on the 12th of February 2021 following the coup d'etat. We also endorse the rapporteur's recommendations regarding an extension of the ceasefire and investigation to put an end to violations of human rights and ensure the respect for the rule of law. Notably, when we refer to violations of minorities such as Rohingyas and Muslim minorities, these are violations such as ethnic cleansing, genocide, persecutions, hate speech, etc. We acknowledge the difficult situation facing Myanmar and the knock-on effects of the economy and society, and we think we need to take efficient measures to improve the situation and solve the root causes of the crisis. Today, it's essential to take these responsibilities seriously in order to allow the Rohingya to return to their country and to guarantee peace and security in Myanmar. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I call upon the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation by video statement.
Madam President, we are closely following the development events in Myanmar. We are concerned by the use of weapons by the law enforcement authorities and by the swift radicalization of protest movements which soon lost their initial peaceful character. Against this backdrop, it is critical that all sides show maximal restraint and responsibility for the future of their country. We believe that swift, tangible steps towards mutual reconciliation will allow us to avoid new victims and will help establish a dialogue with a view to finding a way out of the crisis situation. We believe that the international community has a role to play in facilitating the stabilization of the situation in Myanmar. We believe that the necessary conditions for any efforts are a constant commitment to the principles of non-interference in the internal affairs of a state, neutrality, and to not impose one's self-interested political agenda. We believe that attempts to consider the situation in Myanmar from a human rights perspective is politicized and unfounded. The goal of such an approach is not to promote mutually respectful dialogue or constructive cooperation, but to exert political pressure on the country, and the peaceful cooperation is unlikely to be aided by this. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call upon the distinguished representative of the Philippines by Zoom.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Philippines has always supported Myanmar on its democratization path. The realization of this path can only be achieved through the complete return to the status quo ante, the previously existing state of affairs before the events of 1 February 2021, whereby democratic processes can continue in accordance with the will of the Myanmar people. We are deeply concerned with the recent escalation of violence in Myanmar and call on security forces to exercise restraint and not use lethal force against unarmed demonstrators. We have called for the immediate release of Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and a national dialogue among parties who recognize her unifying role in her country's history and its destiny. We have stood by her and the people of Myanmar in their efforts to persevere amidst challenges in establishing the institutions for a fuller democracy. The Philippines has consistently called for rationality and objectivity and constructive approaches that respect Myanmar's sovereignty in its earnest efforts to uphold rule of law and resolve human rights concerns within serious mechanisms for accountability. We would like to ask the Special Rapporteur on how the Council can better support a long-term and enduring pathway to the democratization in Myanmar, and how the massive resources being allocated for hostile mechanisms can better serve such a purpose. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I now call upon the distinguished representative of France by Zoom.
Thank you very much, Madam President. France endorses the statement by the European Union. Special Rapporteur, France thanks you for your report and would like to recall our support for your mandate. France condemns the coup d'etat on the 1st of February and remain very concerned by the situation in Burma. We call again for the unconditional and immediate release of all persons arrested arbitrarily since then, including Aung San Suu Kyi, as well as the President of the Republic, Mint, and the elected representatives. We call for the end to the state of emergency and for power to be restored to the civilian government and for the rule of law to be upheld. Violence committed against peaceful demonstrators who are expressing their yearning for democracy need to end immediately. We support freedom of the press and the rights of human rights defenders. We also call for humanitarian access to be unrestricted, especially in order to provide support to displaced persons. The order of the International Court of Justice issued on the 23rd of January and needs to be taken into account and fully implemented within the prescribed time frame. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of the Maldives by video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. We align ourselves with the statement delivered by Pakistan on behalf of OIC under this agenda item. The Maldives thanks the Special Rapporteur for the comprehensive report prepared on the human rights situation in Myanmar. The government of Maldives strongly condemns the military coup d'etat of 1st February this year in Myanmar and notes with utmost concern the grave human rights violations being committed against the people of Myanmar by the military. We reiterate our call to seize the unlawful detention of peaceful protesters and the leaders of the civilian government. We also call on the military to respect fundamental human rights, including the right to peaceful assembly and association and the right to freedom of expression, and to uphold the democratic rights of the people enshrined in Myanmar's constitution. We call upon the military to put an end to all forms of systemic violence against the people of Myanmar, including the Rohingya people, and to comply strictly with Myanmar's obligation under international humanitarian and human rights law. Madam President, there is an urgent need for collective action to effectively address the escalating situation in Myanmar. We join the international community in calling for full accountability for all those who are responsible for violations of international human rights law. In conclusion, we concur with the recommendations of the Special Rapporteur's report and emphasize the urgent need to support the victims and call on the military to provide unhindered humanitarian access. The Maldives stands in solidarity with the people of Myanmar, including with the Rohingya community, and call on the military to restore democracy and to seek a peaceful resolution to the current crisis. I thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of Malaysia by video statement.
Thank you. Malaysia associates itself with the statement of the OIC. The full version of Malaysia's statement is on extranet. Malaysia takes note of the report of the Special Rapporteur. Here we wish to reiterate the key points raised by Malaysia at the informal ASEAN ministerial meeting held on 2nd March 2021 as follows. Malaysia continues to support Myanmar's democratic transition, peace process and inclusive economic development. The will and aspiration of the people of Myanmar must be upheld. Malaysia calls for the prompt and unconditional release of Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, U Win Mint and other political leaders. We urge all parties to exercise restraint and stop the use of violence against unarmed civilians. Myanmar authorities must provide the necessary space for peaceful assemblies as well as freedom of speech and expression for citizens. Malaysia hopes that Myanmar would ensure access to humanitarian assistance. Malaysia stands ready to collaborate with others in this regard, and Malaysia urges Myanmar to remain steadfast and deliver on its commitment to ensure the safe, dignified and sustainable return of Rohingya refugees. Malaysia calls on all parties to give utmost priority to the maintenance of peace and security, uphold the rule of law, and resolve any disagreements through established legal mechanisms and dialogue in a peaceful manner. Malaysia will continue to work through ASEAN to facilitate Myanmar towards finding a peaceful and sustainable solution. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia by video statement.
Madam President, first of all, we would like to echo the statement made by the Islamic Conference on Myanmar. We have taken note of the special report by Mr. Thomas Andrews, and we appreciate his efforts to report on recent developments in Myanmar. We are very concerned by the serious violations of human rights and of international humanitarian law there. There have been arbitrary detentions and an excessive use of force against civilians, as well as killings. We are equally concerned by the lack of humanitarian access to help those in need. Myanmar is a priority issue for my government, and we attach great importance to it. We call for an end to violence and for the Rohingyas to have their rights restored without any discrimination. My delegation would like to reiterate its call to the international community to address this crisis by tackling the root causes thereof and ensuring the safe and voluntary and dignified return of all displaced persons. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of Japan by video statement.
Japan is deeply concerned about the situation in which many civilians in protests across Myanmar were injured or killed by use of force, including shootings by the Myanmar security forces, with many others detained despite repeated calls from the international community. Japan strongly urges the Myanmar military to immediately stop violence against civilians, to release all those detained, including State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi, and to promptly restore the democratic political system. Japan highly appreciates generous acceptance of displaced persons by Bangladesh. It is vital to create an environment conducive to the swift repatriation of the displaced persons in a safe, voluntary and dignified manner. Special Rapporteur, what activities will you carry out in order to improve the human rights and humanitarian situation in Myanmar?
Thank you. I wish to alert listeners that the list of speakers is closed. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia via video statement.
We thank the Special Rapporteur for his update. Australia has grave concerns about the military coup in Myanmar and condemns the deadly violence across the country. The use of lethal force against civilians peacefully protesting is unacceptable and indefensible. We again strongly urge Myanmar's security forces to exercise restraint and refrain from violence. We extend our condolences to the bereaved families. We call for an end to violations of freedom of expression and association, including by lifting of internet restrictions. We are deeply concerned by the harassment, arrest and detention of political leaders, civil society activists, civil servants, journalists and others. We continue to call for the immediate release of Australian Professor Sean Turnell, State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi, President U Win Myint and all others arbitrarily detained. Australia remains seriously concerned by humanitarian crises and ongoing human rights violations against the Rohingya and other minorities in Myanmar. We again call for adherence to international human rights law, including in relation to gender-based violence. We renew our call for unimpeded humanitarian access across Myanmar. Australia stands with the people of Myanmar in their pursuit of democracy, and we reiterate our call for the Myanmar military to engage in dialogue. Australia will continue to play a constructive role, including in consultation with international partners, particularly ASEAN.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of the Netherlands via video statement.
Madam President, the Kingdom of the Netherlands aligns itself with the EU statement. Mr. Andrius, thank you for your report. We strongly support the continuation of your mandate and call on Myanmar to fully cooperate and grant you unfettered access. The Netherlands strongly condemns the military coup and the use of excessive and lethal force by the military and police against peaceful protesters. We are deeply concerned about current restrictions to freedom of expression, assembly and association, and access to information, which are not in line with the international obligations. We stand in solidarity with those who risk their lives simply because of their commitment to a democratic future built on human rights and fundamental freedoms. We call for the immediate end to the state of emergency, the restoration of the legitimate civilian government, and the opening of the elected parliament. The military must immediately and unconditionally release all those who have been arbitrarily detained. Those responsible for violence against peaceful protesters must be held responsible. Because justice for victims is crucial for the future of Myanmar, the Netherlands recalls the International Court of Justice Provisional Measures Order, the ongoing International Criminal Court investigation, and the work of the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar. Mr. Andrius, your report doesn't address accountability in great detail. How do you see your role in ensuring that the current violations will be included in accountability processes? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of Sweden via video statement.
Thank you, Chair. Sweden fully aligns itself with the statement made by the European Union and thanks Special Rapporteur Andrius for his update to the Council. Sweden strongly condemns the military coup in Myanmar. The European Union stands ready to adopt restrictive measures targeting those directly responsible. The elected civilian government and democratic institutions must be restored and the will of the people of Myanmar respected. The military must immediately stop all excessive use of force against peaceful protesters, resulting in injuries, arbitrary arrests, enforced disappearances and killings. Hundreds of protesters, journalists and elected officials have reportedly been arbitrarily detained with scarce or no information about their detention available. All those arbitrarily detained must be immediately released and no one should be subjected to harm while in custody. Sweden takes serious note of the message of the head of the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar on 3rd of March regarding the magnitude of the ongoing human rights violations. Impunity for human rights violations cannot be accepted and accountability must be sought. Mr. Special Rapporteur, given the current situation in Myanmar, what would be your key recommendation to the international community to ensure future accountability for past and current human rights violations? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of Indonesia by Zoom.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Indonesia is deeply concerned on the recent increase in violence that led to multiple civilian casualties. This has negated the Council's strong call during the special session. Once again, we urge all parties, including the security forces, to exercise maximum restraint and refrain from the use of force. The safety and the well-being of Myanmar people is a priority number one. As a state party to international human rights instrument, Myanmar is also bound by the ASEAN Charter and ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. With this in mind, we continue to urge the authority in Myanmar to respect the will of Myanmar people, to seek a peaceful and inclusive solution, to create conducive for dialogue, including the release of all persons arbitrarily detained. Those key messages were emphasized to Myanmar during the informal ASEAN Foreign Minister meeting earlier this month. As the situation is evolving, there are opportunities for Myanmar to re-emerge stronger and more united than before in respecting the human rights of all its people. Along with our call to restoring democracy back on track, further support must be made to strengthen a rule-based and a more inclusive democratic institution and process in Myanmar. In this regard, a better synergy between international support and ASEAN effort is critical. Indonesia stands ready to support Myanmar in upholding the values of a democracy, respect for human rights and fundamental freedom, good governance and rule of law. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela by Zoom.
Gracias.
Thank you, Vice President. The report presented by the Special Rapporteur is biased and imbalanced. It contains unverified information and references to facts whose sources have not been duly corroborated. Venezuela reiterates that imposing such politicized mandates impedes constructive dialogue on the protection and promotion of human rights. We have called for dialogue and understanding in favor of the rights of all the citizens of Myanmar, and we hope to see political stability in the country. But for that, it is important to strengthen international solidarity and cooperation in accordance with the decisions taken by Myanmar. We reiterate that this Council should not continue supporting these hostile mandates against countries of the Global South. They are unnecessary and ineffective, and they undermine the right to self-determination of peoples and the universal principles of respect for sovereignty and non-interference in the internal affairs of states. We reaffirm that the UPI is a suitable mechanism for tackling the human rights situation in the world on an equal footing. We express our support for initiatives that contribute to enduring peace and for efforts geared towards finding a political solution and national reconciliation in Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland by video statement.
Madame la Présidente.
President, Switzerland thanks the Special Rapporteur for his latest report at this critical time for Myanmar. Switzerland is deeply alarmed by the severe deterioration of the human rights situation in Myanmar following the power takeover by the military. We are very concerned by the violent repression carried out in recent days by the military against their own population. We are very worried by the illegal use of force, including the lethal use of force against peaceful demonstrators. Switzerland urges the Burman Army to restore the democratically elected civilian government, and we call for the unconditional release of all arbitrarily detained persons. Switzerland is very concerned by an integration of elements from the law on cybersecurity into the law on e-transactions by the army, which effectively criminalizes the right to freedom of expression online. Switzerland considers that such elements violate human rights. We are also concerned by the fact that certain independent media outlets have been stripped of their license. This further restrains the right to freedom of opinion and expression. Switzerland supports the call of the Special Rapporteur for the UN Security Council to take specific measures against the escalation of violence in Myanmar, and we call for the Special Rapporteur to give an immediate access to the country. Special Rapporteur, what immediate measures can the international community take to maintain and protect the rights to freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly in Myanmar? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of Belgium by video statement.
Madam President, Belgium is deeply concerned about the current development in Myanmar and condemns the military coup in the strongest words. We call on the military junta to relinquish the power and to immediately and unconditionally release Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi, President Win Myint, and all others arbitrarily detained. In addition, Belgium deplores and condemns the brutality and lethal force used against peaceful protesters who are standing up for justice, democracy, and their human rights. We urge the military junta to respect the human rights of the people of Myanmar, including the rights to freedom of assembly, expression, and privacy. In all this, let us not forget about the situation of the Rohingya. In violation of the judgment of the International Court of Justice, they still face discrimination, remain cut off from livelihoods, education, and basic services, face murder and torture, and their access to citizenship remains denied. Mr. Andrius, in this regard, how do you evaluate the impact of the military coup on the situation of the Rohingya? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea by video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. The Republic of Korea conveys its appreciation to the Special Rapporteur for his report. The report is indeed timely and informative, reflecting the recent situation in Myanmar. As it points out, the human rights situation in Myanmar has deteriorated, and the people of Myanmar who demand fundamental freedoms and a return to democracy are in danger. My delegation especially expresses grave concern over numerous civilian casualties in Myanmar. We condemn the violent suppression of protests by the military and police forces of Myanmar and strongly urge the authorities to immediately stop such use of force. We also strongly call for an immediate release of all those arbitrarily detained, including State Councillor Do Aung San Suu Kyi, President Win Min, and other political leaders, civil society activists, and journalists. The Korean government has been supporting the democratic transition in Myanmar. We believe that the Myanmar people's aspiration for democracy should be respected at all times. My government, along with the international community, will closely watch the situation in Myanmar and consider measures to take in response to developments in Myanmar. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of India by video statement.
Madam President, India shares a long land and maritime border with Myanmar. As its close neighbor, India has direct stakes in peace and stability in Myanmar. We are therefore deeply concerned with the recent developments, including the loss of lives in Myanmar. The safety and well-being of the people of Myanmar remains our priority. We urge maximum restraint and believe that the rule of law and democratic process must be upheld. Madam President, as a democracy and neighbor of Myanmar, we have remained invested in the process of democratic transition in Myanmar. Our developmental and humanitarian efforts in Myanmar have been aimed at its socio-economic development. We will continue with these efforts in the interest of the people of Myanmar so that they do not suffer. We have noted that the recent informal ASEAN ministerial meeting called on the parties concerned to seek a peaceful solution through constructive dialogue and practical reconciliation in the interest of the people and their livelihood. As a close friend and neighbor of Myanmar and its people, India will continue to closely monitor the situation and remain engaged with like-minded countries to meet the hopes and aspirations of the people of Myanmar. The international community must work together and lend its meaningful support at this critical juncture so that the people of Myanmar do not suffer. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of the United States of America by video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Mr. Andrius, for your continued focus on human rights in Myanmar following the February 1 coup. The United States strongly supports the independence of mandate holders, and we thank you for your work. We stand with the people of Myanmar as they pursue democracy, human rights, and fundamental freedoms, and respect for the rule of law. We call on all members of the international community to join efforts to press the military to refrain from violence against peaceful protesters and restore power to the democratically elected government. We urge the Myanmar military to do precisely that. Immediately restore power to the democratically elected government, refrain from further violence, release those unjustly detained, respect freedom of expression, movement, and association, refrain from harassment and detention of journalists, allow unhindered humanitarian access to life-saving assistance for all people in need, and lift restrictions on telecommunications and internet access. What actions will encourage the military to refrain from violence and return power to the democratically elected government? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of Thailand by video statement.
Madam President, Thailand notes the report presented by the Special Rapporteur. First, as a next-door neighbor sharing a long common border, With Myanmar and Thai peoples having close interaction in many aspects, Thailand continues to follow development in Myanmar with much concern. As with other countries, we are saddened by the loss of life and suffering of the people of Myanmar due to escalating violence in the country. Second, Thailand reiterates the statements made by Brunei Darussalam as chair of ASEAN on 1st of February 2021 and 2nd of March 2021, which call on all sides in Myanmar to exercise utmost restraint as well as flexibility. We call for de-escalation of the situation and release all detainees. We also urge all parties concerned to seek a peaceful solution for Myanmar and its people to dialogue via any constructive channel. Third, Thailand supports ASEAN readiness to assist Myanmar and ASEAN family members in a positive, peaceful, and constructive manner. I thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of the Lao People's Democratic Republic by Zoom.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. As an immediate neighboring country and ASEAN fellow, the Lao PDR has closely followed the developments in the Republic of the Union of Myanmar. Madam Vice President, development, peace, and human rights are interrelated. Peace is an essential element for the realization of development, as well as the promotion and protection of all human rights. We are of the view that the international community should constructively engage with Myanmar and create a favorable condition for Myanmar to solve its internal differences by peaceful means. Furthermore, we wish to emphasize that the promotion and protection of human rights should be pursued through a genuine dialogue and cooperation between and among countries and the UN human rights mechanisms in accordance with the reality of the national circumstances of each country. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of Spain via video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. First, we'd like to thank you for your valuable work in spite of the current context and the difficulties connected to restrictions of access to the country. Spain resoundingly condemns the removal of the civilian government, as well as the arbitrary detention of President Eamon and the Secretary of State Aung San Suu Kyi, as well as other politicians, human rights defenders, journalists and members of civil society. Spain shares the concern at the arbitrary detentions, the prosecution of citizens for exercising their fundamental freedoms and defence of human rights. We would urge the armed forces to exercise maximum restraint faced with the peaceful demonstrations against the coup d'etat. Nothing can justify the excessive use of force on innocent civilians, and nor can the attacks that we've seen in the last number of days against medical practitioners be justified. We regret the total absence of collaboration with the Special Rapporteur and the prohibition of access to the country since 2017, and we'd like to offer our support. Finally, we would like to ask you about the follow-up that is taking place in the cases of sexual violence in the country, particularly in Rakhine State, as well as the measures that are taking place to try to guarantee the fulfilment of Security Council Resolutions 1325, Women, Peace and Security. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of Croatia via video statement.
Madam President, Croatia aligns itself with the EU statement. We thank the Special Rapporteur for his update on current human rights situation in Myanmar. Croatia is deeply concerned with the recent course of events. We condemn in the strongest terms the deposition of the legitimately elected civilian government carried out by the Myanmar Armed Forces on 1st February 2021. We firmly oppose the declaration of the state of emergency, the suspension of the parliament, and the arbitrary detentions of peaceful protesters, members of the civil society, journalists, local and foreign advisors, and others. People of Myanmar used their right to non-violent and peaceful protest, to which the military responded with intimidation, beatings, mass arbitrary detentions, and even murder. We have to express grave concern and continuing reports of human rights violations and abuses in Myanmar, including sexual and gender-based violence and particularly violations and abuses against children. Croatia calls for the immediate and unconditional release of all those who have been arbitrarily detained, charged or arrested during and in the aftermath of 1st February on suspicious grounds. Finally, we support the Special Rapporteur's request for an immediate, full and unrestricted access of human rights monitors, including the OHCHR, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar, and the UN Special Envoy. I thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the distinguished representative of Albania via video statement.
Madam President, Albania thanks the Special Rapporteur for his report on Myanmar and takes note of the recommendations and the necessary measures to tackle the current crisis, and we support the renewal of the mandate. The serious political events that are taking place in Myanmar clearly undermine the 10 years of democratic transition. We are profoundly concerned by the violations of human rights in Myanmar, as well as of the freedom of opinion and expression, religion or belief and association, and a freedom of assembly. Albania condemns the coup d'etat that we've seen in Myanmar and all the violations of human rights. Democracy and the will of the people needs to be re-established. Albania deplores, we share the calls of the Special Rapporteur and the international community for halting the excessive use of force and guaranteeing the security of all peaceful demonstrators. The lethal use of force and real bullets against peaceful demonstrators is unacceptable. We are concerned at the serious violations of human rights, particularly against the Rohingya and other minorities, and we would call for a halt to all violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law in the ethnic areas. Albania would strongly encourage peaceful dialogue and reconciliation, and reaffirms our support to the people of Myanmar in the quest for democracy, peace and security. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from the distinguished representative of China via Zoom.
Madam Vice President, China follows closely the situation in Myanmar. Currently, we hope that the relevant parties in Myanmar will act in the fundamental interests of the people, address their differences through dialogue consultation within the constitutional legal framework. The immediate priority is to prevent further bloodshed and conflict and ease and cool down the situation as soon as possible. The international community should, on the premise of respecting Myanmar's sovereignty, political independence, territorial integrity and national unity, help the relevant parties in Myanmar to engage in dialogue and reconciliation in accordance with the wishes and interests of its people. The HRC should be conducive for relevant parties to bridge differences, resolve problems, and avoid escalating tensions or further complicating situations. We hope the Special Rapporteur should act in accordance with the Code of Conduct Special Rapporteurs to act impartially, objectively within the mandate. Myanmar is a member of the ASEAN family. China welcomes the ASEAN informal foreign ministers meeting and supports ASEAN's upholding principles, non-interference, internal affairs, consensus building, and resolve the problem in the ASEAN with common ground on the basis of respect for Myanmar's sovereignty and the will of the people. China stands ready to engage and communicate with relevant parties and play a constructive role in easing the situation in the country. Thank you, Vice President.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. This was the last speaker we could accommodate at this meeting. The interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar will continue tomorrow at 3 p.m. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I understand that certain delegations have requested to exercise the right of reply. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon by Zoom. You have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. The occupying force has always tried to use discussion on Syria item to politicize the work of the Council and to tarnish the fame of those who stood up to its violations and threats. Therefore, My country, Lebanon, rejects and condemns with the strongest words the allegations of the occupying power and its associated organizations vis-à-vis Hezbollah party. Given that Hezbollah party is a Lebanese component, which is party to the political life and institutional life in Lebanon, it is a part and a parcel of Lebanese resistance against occupation and Israeli aggressions to Lebanese sovereignty. Therefore, we don't accept any way that it should be characterized as terrorist. Madam President, the record of the occupying power is replete for decades with crimes and violations against the rights of Palestinians and their neighbors, i.e. Lebanon, Syria, among others. Therefore, we are surprised that this power claimed that it has an interest in the human rights of other countries. It's even more weird that it is calling for international accountability for those who resist it, forgetting that it is this occupying power which should be held accountable internationally before any other party, given the scale of its crime and its disregard of international legitimacy since its creation. And thank you, Madam Vice President.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey. You have the floor. You have 3 minutes by Zoom.
Thank you, Madam President. Turkey is using its right of reply regarding the unfounded accusations made by the representatives of the Syrian regime and Greece. Although the said allegations by the representative of the regime are not even worth a reply, we categorically reject all of them. Sharing 911-kilometer land border with Syria, Turkey has been directly exposed to all repercussions of the regime's atrocities. Hosting 2/3 of the entire Syrian refugee population in the world, Turkey has practically assumed the burden of a total of almost 9 million Syrians on its own soil, as well as in the north of Syria. Turkey will do its utmost to contribute to restoring Syria's territorial integrity and political unity once the Syrian-led and Syrian-owned UN-facilitated political process establishes a credible, inclusive, and non-sectarian governance. Secondly, we acknowledge the reason behind the statement of the representative of Greece. As a country that has not complied its obligations under the international humanitarian law and pushed back over 80,000 refugees in recent years, most of whom were Syrians. These actions took place under the surveillance and support of Frontex and claimed hundreds of civilian lives, including women and children. This illicitly and paradoxically reflects their care about Syrian people. On the other hand, we do not reply to the accusations of one specific entity that we do not recognize. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I understand that the delegation of Syria would like to exercise a right of reply. I call on the distinguished representative of Syria to take the floor by Zoom. You have 3 minutes, please.
شكرا السيد النائب الرئيس.
Thank you. It's surprising to see people take the floor in such an audacious fashion to talk about violations in Syria, whilst this country supports terrorism, protects it, and contributes to the development in Syrian territory. As supports representatives of terrorists, there are excuses put forward to try to combat terrorism. Their political leader supports terrorism. We all know that the priority of the Turkish regime has always been and will continue to be activities against Syrians for political interests and economic interests. This is immoral. We believe that no country should act in this way and dare to speak of transparency and accountability or the rule of law I don't think this even merits a response to the allegations. We do not recognize the legitimacy of this kind of regime in light of all the violations that have been committed. And the Turkish regime, unfortunately to date, has not recognized all these violations. The Syrians recognized today are people who head up terrorist organizations who are financed and supported by the regime and indeed encouraged to conduct their activities whether within Syria or outside. Thank you.
Are there any other requests for rights of reply? I understand that there are none. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before closing this meeting, I would like to once again invite all delegations to kindly upload the Word version of their oral statements through the online system for the list of speakers, Sprig. It is particularly important that the interpreters have a transcript of statements under current remote meeting circumstances, especially in case of poor sound connection. I thank you. We will reconvene at 10 a.m. tomorrow to continue the interactive dialogue with the Commission on Human Rights in South Sudan, and thereafter hear the presentation of the report of the High Commissioner on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the oral update by the Secretary General on progress made in the implementation of follow-up action to enable more effective work in the future and to strengthen the prevention capacity of the United Nations system, followed by general debate on Agenda Item 4. I hereby close the 31st meeting of the 46th session of the Human Rights Council.